today India's two largest private philanthropic trusts. And between them, for those of you who are not aware, they control 66% almost, give or take a few percentage points, of the ownership of Tata Sons, our parent investment holding company. So the worth of the stock that they control technically is several tens of thousands of crores. But what they receive as dividends from Tata Sons is what they actually give away. Again, by Indian law, they have to give the substantial part of it away in the same year in which they receive it. And they are the largest private philanthropists in India today. I think somewhere in the region of around 500 crores is what in the last few years they've been giving away. Our former chairman, J.R.D. Tata, in fact, has a very famous quote about the activities of these two sons of the founder, and indeed the founder himself. And he said, "The wealth gathered by Jamsetji Tata and his sons in half a century of industrial pioneering formed but a minute fraction of the amount by which they enriched the nation. The whole of that wealth is held in trust for the people and used exclusively for their benefit. The cycle is thus complete. What came from the people has gone back to the people many times over." And that, I think, in many ways tells you why so many of us who work for the Tata Group feel so proud about what we do. The sense that a lot of what we do is going to generate profits that ultimately are given away for some of the most humane causes, both in India and overseas. And incidentally, even what we're doing in Uttarakhand, a significant part of that is going to be supported and sponsored with the Tata Trusts. J.R.D. Tata, in his own right, was also a great philanthropist. In fact, he also created a trust, which after his death is the J.R.D. and Thelma Tata Trust. Thelma was his wife, which again is a significant contributor to various social causes in India. In the 1970s, J.R.D. insisted and pushed through with the various Tata companies an amendment in their Articles of Association. And the amendment reads, "The company shall be mindful of its social and moral responsibilities to consumers, employees, shareholders, society, and the local community." So again, in the 1970s, when India was still a very restricted business environment, there was the license Raj, for somebody to think in these terms and to actually institutionalize it in the company's articles was something very, very far-sighted, and again, very much in sync with the way in which the various chairmen of Tata's thought about business. So then we come to the previous group chairman, Mr. Ratan Tata, with whom I had the great good fortune of working for a number of years. He instituted the Tata Code of Conduct. So for the first time in Mr. Ratan Tata's tenure, we actually developed a formal written product called the Tata Code of Conduct, which all our employees are expected to read and adhere to. And here again, Mr. Ratan Tata insisted that there be a specific clause that talks about our commitment to the community. So there is a clause number 10, which was instituted in the Code of Conduct when it was launched in 1999. This is on corporate citizenship. And I'll read it out because it's again very interesting. "A Tata company shall be committed to good corporate citizenship, not only in the compliance of all relevant laws and regulations, but also by actively assisting in the improvement of quality of life of the people in the communities in which it operates. The company shall encourage volunteering by its employees and collaboration with community groups." And this is the most important part. "The company shall not treat these activities as optional, but should strive to incorporate them as an integral part of its business plan." So now you have Mr. Ratan Tata saying that apart from nice words, we also need to make sure that in our business plans, we actually incorporate a significant facet of what you might term CSR. So I think with each of our leaders over time, we have had this philosophy that the community is integral to the operation of business, and your conduct will define how you can be successful. Now, You might say that, this is all words. There are so many corporates that have booklets. Some of them are very pretty booklets with nice photos. But what does it really mean in practice? And I'll maybe walk you through three personal examples. Personal in the sense that I was working with Mr. Tata when I saw all of these three examples happen, which will give you a sense of what it means to actually walk the talk. So the first example I will give is something many of you may remember. And all three examples, by the way, are not nice examples. They're all significant challenges that faced the Tata Group at one time or the other in the last 15 years. And I can't say we were necessarily proud about what happened in each of these cases, but I think the way we conducted ourselves sends a message. The first was the issue in the late 90s when one of our companies was accused of harboring anti-national elements in some of our tea plantations. Whatever interaction had happened with some of these extremist forces had been done with the full knowledge of the Central Intelligence Services. And unfortunately, because it was intelligence, it was something that could not be shared publicly. The state government was not in the know. The state government, which was the state of Assam at that time, took it upon itself to pursue some of our executives and file a number of cases, threaten prosecution, and so on. While we took our case to the highest authorities in the land, it became clear that there were various agendas working against us. And finally, we decided to actually take out front page advertisements in some of the national newspapers, explaining our position and being quite, in fact, critical about some of the motivations behind the local government's approach to the issue. Now, I think there are very few corporates in India who, let alone doing it publicly, would even do privately what we did, which was to outline our position, take it to the public, and ask the public to be the judge. So that was one illustration. Fortunately, over time, things got ironed out. People saw the facts of the case. The intelligence services then reported that they had, in fact, directed our personnel to engage with some of these people. So everything was eventually cleared up, but a lot of this could not be brought out in the public, and for a period of time we bore the brunt of that. The second example I'll give is our aborted attempts to enter the airline industry. This is something that many of you have read about, you've heard about. Mr. Tata has gone on record many times about this. So just to sort of briefly recap, there was a point in time when we tried to create a new airline in partnership with Singapore Airlines, which would offer this country, and we're talking about the early and mid 90s, what we thought would be a high class service at a time when there was very little competition, very little else to offer customers. We were blocked for a period of time, and then a policy was brought in under which no foreign airline could invest in Indian Airlines, some of which is still playing itself out as we speak. So we then made a new proposition. We said, fine, we will not have equity participation by Singapore Airlines, but we'll have a technical services agreement with them, and we will hold the equity. That was blocked. Then there was a change in government, and the new government which came in decided to put Air India on the block. Now, many of you will know Air India was, in fact, Tata Airways till it was nationalized. And so this seemed a golden opportunity for us to, if you're not allowed to launch a new airline, then take over an existing airline, the national carrier, which used to be the airline we used to run. There was a process through which potential partners were identified. Eventually, in the last round, it was us and the Hinduja group, and eventually Hindujas also were eliminated. And then followed an impasse. So we were the only bidder, but nothing moved. We kept waiting, we kept approaching the government, and nothing happened. And then again, it became clear that there are such strong lobbies in this industry that no matter what you do, come in as a joint venture, you'll be blocked. You come in on a technical agreement, you'll be blocked. You acquire an airline, you'll still be blocked. And we decided to disengage. And the letter that went to the government at that time, again, I think very few corporates in this country would have the courage of conviction to actually send such a letter, withdrawing from a process and saying that we are doing it because it's very clear that there is such strong vested interest that we will be blocked no matter what. Now, as they say, sometimes there is poetic justice, because I think barely a year later you had 911 and the aviation industry just went south. So I don't know what would have happened if we'd actually gone through and succeeded with that bid, but as it happens, we didn't. So that was the second episode where there was a business opportunity literally on a platter, but we were being held back, and we decided to opt out and told the government we're opting out because of these reasons. The third episode, again not a happy one for our group, was a scam that took place in our financial services company now more than a decade back. And really it was about speculation on the stock markets with company funds by a certain group of executives against whom we filed various prosecutions. Now, the story is not about the prosecutions, but the story is actually about the police investigation, in fact, in this state, which we felt didn't actually try to get to the bottom of what we thought was a conspiracy.